Welcome back into the 14. This is the Monday morning edition. I am your host, Chris Lee. Blake Lovell joins me. Blake, more going on than we can even keep track of almost. You have the NCAA Tournament in full bloom, and my goodness, stuff nobody would have predicted happened, which makes for a great tournament. You have 3 SEC teams left. 2 have advanced to the Sweet 16. You had some great baseball this weekend with all 14 teams playing 3-game series in the conference this weekend. I personally went to a no-hitter in Nashville with Jack Leiter, so that was a lot of fun. Almost too much going on to keep up with today, but we're going to try. Anyway, what stands out to you off the top here?
Well, I think if you listen back to our podcast on Friday, I'd say we got some things right. We got some things wrong, as usual. Probably not anything out of the norm there, but it was a wild weekend of NCAA tournament action, to say the least. And, I think just the fact that you look ahead here and, you look at the top 2 seeds for the SEC in Alabama and Arkansas. And, of course, we're recording this on Monday morning. Alabama will play Monday evening. Arkansas is already in the Sweet 16. But, I think you start to look ahead to these 2 teams and you're thinking, boy, the paths are interesting for both of them moving forward here. And I think that they are set up in, as good of a spot as you could ask. Now, again, that's not saying that either one of them are going to advance further, but if you just look at the setup, I think if you're both of them, I don't know that you could have asked for sort of a better situation based on how their individual regions have played out. But beyond that, it's just wild as always in the NCAA tournament and upsets everywhere. And unfortunately for some of the SEC teams, they had to be on the wrong side of that.
When the tournament's first weekend is in the books, which we're still a few games away from, we're down to 24 teams this morning. There'll be some more games on Monday, but there's always these little nagging things that are jabbing you in the back of your brain that you should have thought about. Like, one thing to me was, and these are non-SEC related, Wisconsin always seems to pull a game or 2 in the tournament. They come in unexciting and nobody expects it. I think we should have given more thought to them beating North Carolina. They blew out North Carolina, by the way. Another one is like Syracuse has this nagging thing where it barely gets in the tournament a few years now running, and then they go on this run, which they did again. So those are the 2 things that, when I look back on this, I'm like, maybe we should have been more in tune to that. The rest of it was just like, stuff happens, in my estimation.
Yeah, it's just, like you said, I feel like we did. That was one of the things I was hesitant about when we made our picks on Friday was, I said, boy, I like San Diego State, but I said, man, I don't like the first round game in terms of that spot, playing Syracuse as a double-digit seed. That's just never a good recipe. I never understood the North Carolina hype. I know we kind of talked about it a little bit, but I don't know. I never understood the hype that North Carolina was going to give Baylor a challenge, because I picked Wisconsin in all my brackets to beat North Carolina. So I never got that, but it just a wild, it's just one of those where, and I think we said this too, going into this particular tournament, there were going to be more unusual maybe games and unusual upsets based on the fact that the circumstances surrounding the season have been unusual. And you've got the setup that is nothing like we're used to in terms of these teams and being in one location and basically staying there for the entirety of this tournament. Just a wild setup, and it's just made for a lot of wild games for sure.
All right, I'm going to get your take on this. Best game of the weekend, my pick would have been Rutgers and Houston, and most disappointing, should have been a great game, should have been an epic game, judging by the final score, was Abilene Christian in Texas.
Wow, best game of the weekend. That's a tough one to pick. I'm trying to think of, gosh, there were so many. I'm like, I don't even know which one stands out the most. Abilene Christian in Texas, that was the finish was unreal, just in terms of how that game played out. It was just a crazy game. Some of the others, I guess, that kind of stood out for me. I'm trying to think. Like, there's been so many games played. I'm trying to think of which ones are kind of stood out the most. Rutgers and Houston was a pretty good game. I thought Arkansas and Texas Tech was fantastic. I think I would put that one up there as one of the better ones of the weekend, for sure. just based on, how that played out. That was just a really, really good game. I would even, I think you could pick both Oral Roberts games and put them probably in the top 6 or 7.
Yeah,
Really, I
yeah.
mean, when you think about it, the one against Ohio State was a great game. The one against Florida was a great game. Which, I mean, as you would expect a team that's a number 15 seed that's going to win 2 games. You would expect those games to be close, and that's kind of what we got there. So I think those are certainly among the mix too.
Yeah, the Abilene Christian Texas game. Abilene Christian shot, what was it, 29.9% from the field and won. I
Yeah.
was watching that with my brother and a friend, and one of them said, "Man, I hope this one goes to overtime. It'd be great." I was like, "No,
Yeah.
no. This is
Yeah.
exciting in terms of seeing the upset, but the basketball was pretty bad. I didn't find it compelling action. I thought Abilene's offense was just give it to their little guards and let them try to go to the hole and make a very contested layup one after another. But that team just got so many rebounds, and Texas just never really responded. And that's why I say that was like the great game that should have been, because we all love the 14-3 upsets unless your team is the three on the side of that. But it just, in terms of being compelling basketball to watch style wise, it just was not the best.
Well, like I said, we got some things right and some things wrong. We did talk about Oral Roberts on Friday. That was one
Yeah,
that
I'll give
just
you credit. You brought that up. I didn't, from looking at the numbers, I didn't really see it in terms of the Ken Palm stuff. But that's where you kind of go beyond that to
yeah.
dial into how teams play, and you did nail it with that one.
Well, and we mentioned Abilene Christian too. I said it. Texas is kind of one of those teams I was talking about, looking at the VSiN research and all that, and Texas was at the very top of the upset victims. And the more you looked at it, and that's one of the things we brought up. We said, hey, Abilene Christian, they forced more turnovers than anybody in this field, and that's exactly what they did. Texas turned over 23 times. And what do you know? Now they're sitting here, go out of, win the Big 12 tournament. Now they're out, and Abilene Christian marching on. So yeah, it was just, man, there were so many just interesting storylines I think you could take away just from that first round in general. But then, again, to have sort of the start to the second round, you've got Loyola advancing past Illinois. The chaos region in the Midwest where you've got Loyola versus Oregon State now. You've got Syracuse against Houston. I think that's something too. The Midwest we knew was probably the strongest of all the groups in the regions, and it turns out that we're kind of seeing that play out just in terms of how some of these teams are advancing as lower seeds. So,
Well, Arkansas is the one team in the Sweet 16. Alabama and LSU are going to have shots to do that today. But we called out Justin Smith Friday. That kid was huge again for Arkansas against Texas Tech.
yeah, there's a reason. Arkansas fans were upset that Justin Smith wasn't considered, among the all SEC teams. At least not. I think he was on maybe the AP team, but just in terms of I think the coaches or whoever votes on the other one. But yeah, you can understand why. This guy, if you just look at his numbers, there's no doubt that beyond Moses Moody, you could certainly say that he's the second most important player on that Arkansas team. And 49 points in their 2 games in the tournament thus far. What's he think he's had? He had 13 rebounds the first game, he had 6 in the second. Got to the free throw line a lot. Just so efficient. He went 9 of 17 from 2 against Colgate, 9 of 11 against Texas Tech. Just incredible performances he's put on here. And look, he's played all but 2 minutes in the 2 games that they played in this NCAA tournament. So that kind of shows you just the value of a guy like that. And Arkansas, I could not understand. And of course, this is going back to the betting side of me, but I cannot understand why Arkansas was an underdog in this game against Texas Tech. Now, certainly, you felt like it was going to be a close game, but I don't know. I feel like people were maybe leaning a little bit too much on Texas Tech's run in the tournament 2 years ago versus this actual Texas Tech team, because I just thought Arkansas was a better team. And now, again, that held up in terms of the score line, but it was still a really good game against two really good teams. But I just thought that if Arkansas got going, which you saw them be able to do that, they kind of turned it on. Arkansas, to me, is starting to. I don't want to say starting to. They've been there for a while, but they're in that same category with Alabama to me, in that maybe they're not as high octane on offense at times, but when they get going, they are really hard to slow down. And I think that's kind of what you look at with both these teams in Arkansas and Alabama, And that's just one of the things where if you see them fall down by 10 points, you still feel like they've got a pretty good chance. Even if there's 4 or 5 minutes left in a game, if they're down 10 or something, you're still thinking they're probably going to find a way to make this thing interesting. And so that's the luxury that both of them have. And so it's just what a spot for Arkansas. And now they get the rematch. I kind of joked on Twitter. We all knew it was coming back on December the 20th when Arkansas beat Oral Roberts by 11 in Fayetteville. We all knew that was going to be a Sweet 16 game at one point. So there's your setup for next Saturday.
Yeah, who didn't see that one coming, right?
Hey, by the way, Oral Roberts led by 12 in the second half in that game.
Oh, my goodness. That's one of those teams that I think they're better than whatever the computers have them rated for reasons I can't really explain.
Well, I think it's because, I don't know. I mean, the Summit League, if you just look around at it, the Summit League, South Dakota State, I think finished at the top, but they only played 12 games in the conference. And then, you had South Dakota, North Dakota State, and then you had Oral Roberts right behind them. And, you go beyond that. I feel like it's sort of that league that's maybe just in the middle of the pack in terms of, what you can kind of look at and what are you going to get from them. But no, and that's the thing is we kept saying, and that's the only reason I brought that up in terms of Oral Roberts could actually pull off this upset against Ohio State. Because if you just looked at the numbers, again, kind of what I mentioned with Abilene Christian, a little bit different in that Abilene Christian gets a lot of their points off their defense, but Oral Roberts, the best free throw shooting team in the field, one of the best three-point shooting teams in the field. They don't turn the ball over. To me, that is the trifecta when it comes to how can you pull off upsets. You don't beat yourselves with turnovers. You can make free throws in a close game, and if you get hot, you can make a lot of three-pointers. Like that, to me, is the trio you need to be in the spot that they're in, and that's how they've gotten here to this point.
Well, not to mention, these tournaments are a lot of times about one superstar who can carry you, and having the leading scorer in the country doesn't hurt.
Right. No, not at all. And, that's, again, like you said, one of those teams that I think, as a 15, if you would have put them up against, I don't know, like, really, I think if you put them up against Ohio State, as I said, Ohio State was a team that just had a lot of defensive issues. You could tell right away, I thought that, boy, if this Oral Roberts team got hot, Ohio State could be in trouble because they just don't play defense well enough. Now, I think if they played someone like a Houston, maybe it's a little bit different because I think Houston can probably dictate some things with their defense, and I think it just would have been a completely different game. But the fact is, they got matched up with Ohio State, and it was sort of the perfect storm, I think, in terms of playing a team that you really matched up well against. And that's what the NCAA tournament's all about. We say this every year. We can say in December that we think a team's a Final Four team, but until you see the matchups, you have no idea. And I think that's what's so important to always keep in mind is that matchups are everything. And that's another one, like with Loyola Chicago and Illinois. That was a terrible second-round draw for Illinois, and it's just about the matchup. So
I'm looking at Oral Roberts' schedule and going, how in the world did these guys lose 10 games? Now, part of your answer is 5 of them were to NCAA tournament teams: Missouri, Wichita State, Oklahoma, Arkansas. Lost 2, I guess just 1 to South Dakota State, which is a really good program. Like you said, I think the games played thing really hurt them. That was a team I thought, preseason had a chance to be in the spot where Oral Roberts was. That's just a very, very good program. Some other losses in here: North Dakota State, UMKC. I won't belabor the point. But back to Arkansas, we've talked about how Eric Musselman, night in to night out, can go very differently, go many different ways with his minutes. Well, Connor Vanover doesn't even play against Texas Tech. Desi Sills plays under 3 minutes, and basically the other 6 guys play the whole game.
Well, and I think this was kind of one of those situations sort of like with Vanover. I think you almost kind of have to pick your spots in a tournament setting like this in terms of what does the matchup look like, how is the game going to flow, because really when you look at it against Colgate, you only played 4 minutes against Colgate too, and I think that's one of the things where and we've seen this before with coaches and teams, that once you get into the NCAA tournament, your rotation can look a little bit different than maybe what got you there in the first place in terms of how many minutes certain guys were getting, because it's win or go home. Like, it's win or your season's over. And I think, you tend to play some of your top guys a lot more minutes, and you put them in that situation where it's like, okay, maybe you had some of your stars playing 33 or 34 minutes. Well, now it's probably more like 38 or 39, and it's just you can only afford to take them out for so long in these kind of games. And so I think you just kind of see how Eric Musselman's done it, and that's the thing too. He's been here before. Like I was laughing yesterday because he jumped up on the table, the media front, table in the front row there after the game, after they won. And I'm thinking back, I'm like, boy, that was, what is it, 3 years ago, something like that. He was literally right. I mean, I'm like staring at Eric Musselman. His kneecaps are like right in my face, and he's like almost breaking my laptop whenever Nevada made the double-digit comeback where he just came over and jumped on our table. And that's just like, it's so crazy to think that, I mean, this guy, it's almost like when his teams get down by double digits, like they're exactly where they need to be, because they did that in that run with Nevada. Now they do it, here with Arkansas. We think back to the kind of how the Colgate game played out. They were down 11 the second half, I think, against Texas Tech. They just he finds a way to rally his teams. And again, Arkansas sitting here, Sweet 16, first time since '96, and now gets to face a number 15 seed. Quite a setup, to say the least.
Alabama, my goodness, that path has opened up a little bit. We talked about how Connecticut could be problematic in the round of 32. Maryland won that game instead. Alabama struggled with their own Iona for a bit, but pulled through. Man, you got to love how Alabama's portion of the bracket is shaping up. BYU's been eliminated. Texas has been eliminated. Now the top part of that bracket, Michigan, LSU, Colorado, and Florida State, is interesting. But yeah, Alabama just kind of needed to get through that one, get the nerves out of the way. And I thought the Crimson Tide pretty well took care of business. I mean, yes, was it closer than I think a lot of us anticipated? It was, but you see that happen with a lot of great teams.
I think it's what I would say to that is you got the bad game out of the way on offense. Like, they got their offensive game that was just not what we're used to with them. They got that out of the way. Now I feel like maybe you kind of have less nerves, like you said. You kind of open up a bit more to where your offense can flow a bit better. I don't know, and maybe I'm completely wrong, because Ken Pom does have this as a 4-point game with Maryland. But if you talk about games that were on the opposite of the great game scale, if you watch that Maryland-UConn game, I thought UConn played one of the worst games that you could play in that scenario, and yet still only lost by 9. That to me says something about both teams, and that I'm not sure how Maryland just didn't completely put them away. Now they were up, they were up pretty considerable margin for the second half, or at least early too. But UConn looked terrible. 5 of 12 from the free throw line, 7 of 23 from 3, 14 of 42 from 2. One of the strangest stats you'll ever see. I think they had 22 offensive rebounds. At one point, they had it was first half, I think they finished with 15 or 16 offensive rebounds, only had 9 second chance points. They just missed everything. And I think maybe that's a scenario where I don't know that game told us a ton about Maryland, other than they just played a team that, again, had one of the worst performances you could probably ask for in that scenario. I just feel like this is a clash where we've seen this so many times before. A high-octane team like Alabama, who's going to run up and down the floor. Maryland is going to try to slow this thing to a halt. If Alabama, this almost goes back to kind of what we saw. It's a different dynamic, but the Arkansas-Colgate game, where I thought Arkansas, for some reason, early on, tried to play Colgate's game. I think you could say the same thing about LSU and St. Bonaventure. Those games started in the favor of, those teams like Colgate and St. Bonaventure, because the game was slowed down. You didn't have a lot of transition stuff. If Alabama can just turn this into a game where they don't try to walk up and down the floor with Maryland or really try to play at their pace, I think Alabama will win this game. But you can't, again, let those kind of teams dictate their tempo, because if you do that, it really can change things a little bit. So I think it's still an interesting matchup. I'm not saying I think Alabama's going to come out and win by 15, but I think in the scenario to where if Alabama gets going, I think they can score some points here potentially on this Maryland team, even though they're a good defensive team and have played a pretty tough schedule this year. But it's an interesting one still to me.
Let me take us on a quick sidebar. One thing that I really just don't like is just the lack of energy in the buildings.
Yeah.
But because you just got it, a few hundred people in those gyms or so, it just doesn't feel like the NCAA tournament when I'm watching, and I wonder how much that's affecting things.
Yeah, I think, to me, Arkansas was the one that really stood out, because I looked at them in that early on against Colgate, and I was thinking, my goodness, what are they? Like, they just were, I don't know, they just didn't look like they had any energy, that they were just sort of letting Colgate dictate everything. They were taking bad shots. They were just almost like it was a pickup game at times where, like you said, there's just not a lot of energy. It doesn't feel like you're even maybe watching a tournament game based on the atmosphere and that kind of stuff. So, I'm with you on that. It's so different, and I think we've seen that, and it's just it's a strange thing in terms of this entire tournament. But that's what I said too. I think that's why it's probably not, that surprising to see some of the outcomes we've seen to this point because we knew the different atmosphere, just the different scenario, circumstances, everything. We knew it was going to make for a pretty different tournament, and I think we've kind of seen that to this point.
Well, back to the key thing for Alabama, in my opinion, we've been talking for at least a month now about what does Alabama get out of Herb Jones in the postseason because we knew he wasn't playing 100%. The box score lines, at least in terms of the scoring, have been underwhelming at times, but he plays 39 minutes and scores 20 points. And he did turn it over 5 times, which happens when you got a big who handles the ball as much as he does, but he gets 3 steals and 6 rebounds. And really, it was kind of that quintessential Herb Jones performance that Alabama needs when Alabama is really clicking on all cylinders, which helped when Petty and Shackelford didn't have the games they normally have. But to me, that's the most encouraging thing coming out of the first game was that they got Herb Jones back at that level he was playing at before the injuries started to take their toll.
Yeah, he was really good, and I mean, you just kind of saw him take over that game at different points. And be in a situation where he could do those kind of things that he had to do for them to win. I mean, he played all but 1 minute, and I just the stat line for Alabama, I thought was a little deceiving in terms of you looked at what Herbert Jones did, and certainly. He's just, the usual. He fills up the stat sheet. He does all those little things that are going to do it. But then you look at a guy like Alex Reese, who had 6 points, and you're probably thinking, okay, well, 6 points. I mean, well, that's not a lot. But he had him at the most important time you could have him, where he hit those 2 threes late to kind of help Alabama sort of extend their lead a bit and feel a little bit better about things. And, even different guys that I think you just kind of look at what they did and brought to the table in terms like Keon Ellis. I mean, he had 2 points, but he did a lot of other different things that you saw throughout that game. And that's just the thing with Alabama. It all starts with Herbert Jones, but then you look beyond that and you're just saying, okay, you've got these other guys that they can all add different contributions, Quinterly and Shackelford and all these other guys, Jordan Bruner, just go up and down the line, Juwan Gary. They've just got a lot of different guys that can do a lot of different things well, and they're guys that sort of complement each other. And yes, everything goes through Herbert Jones, but it's just it's a really good team, and I'm telling you, I look at this matchup with Maryland, and I feel like Alabama is in a decent spot just based on how they play, as long as they can force the tempo and be able to play the game they want to play, because I don't know that it's not a close game if they try to play, the way Maryland wants to play.
Okay, I probably didn't get to see 2 minutes of LSU and St. Bonaventure,
Ooh.
but the thing that was astonishing was we've talked about how LSU has 4 guys who do everything for them. Well, they had Andre Hite step up for 13 and 10 just out of nowhere. And the funny thing is, really, St. Bonaventure was the team that relied more on its starting 5. I mean, those guys all played 31 minutes or more, and then the guys coming off the bench just play bit minutes here and there. But I think we're starting to see the LSU team that you have been so high on all along.
Well, I think so, and I think that bodes well for them against Michigan. I just feel like if they play the way that we've seen them play the past couple weeks, I think they can beat Michigan. Now, if they don't, Michigan's the kind of team that can exploit every weakness that LSU has, and that's what would concern me a little bit if I'm an LSU fan. But if you looked at this game, LSU and St. Bonaventure, I mean, this was kind of, again, not the same with Arkansas Colgate, but a little similar in that this game was 10-8 with 9 minutes left in the first half, which that was exactly where St. Bonaventure wanted that game to be. They wanted that game to be 10-8 with 9 minutes to go in the first half, and that's why it was so close. But then you saw LSU kind of flip that switch a bit, and they turned it up. They got transition going. They forced the tempo, and St. Bonaventure just could not hang with them. And I think that's what we talk about with these different teams in the SEC, particularly those 3, Alabama, LSU, Arkansas. I think when they can turn that switch offensively and turn it up to that next level, there are a lot of teams that cannot hang with them. Like majority of the teams probably left in this tournament cannot hang with three teams like that whenever they get going offensively. And I think that's what's going to be important here for LSU is that they need to play this game against Michigan the way that sort of they did after the first half of the first half against St. Bonaventure because, you look at Michigan, they're another team. Like they don't necessarily want to run up and down the floor and just get a ton of offense in that manner because they are so efficient on that side of the court. Also, they're one of the most efficient defensive teams too. So I think for LSU, kind of in this game against St. Bonaventure, you saw a lot of different guys, kind of force the pace. Like you said, you had a guy like Hyatt step up. I mean, I kept trying to find the stat. I never could, but I assume that having three players on the same team have a double-double has got to be one of the strangest feats in NCAA tournament history. I can't imagine there's been too many guys on too many teams where you've had three guys that have a double-double in the same game. Maybe, some of those games in the past where you had 125 points or something, and maybe it's just a double overtime, triple overtime game, probably. But to me, that doesn't feel like it's a normal thing that you see in these kind of games. So, I think LSU, it's not just the Big Four anymore, and I think that's so important for them to make a run here. Is they've got to have production from some of these other guys like Hyatt, like Josh LeBlanc, guys like that, and even just some of the guys who come off and maybe play 10 or 12 minutes, like an Eric Gaines or someone. They can give you some valuable minutes at times. So that's the key for LSU. They just need to turn the pace up, and if they do that, and the good LSU shows up defensively, I think they can hang with Michigan.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think take out like a Loyola Marymount or a team like that just based on possessions, guys are going to rack up stats. I think that, or maybe like a 2-3 overtime game.
Yeah.
I think it's almost impossible to see that. That's a good question. I would like to see if that's happened before, but let's go to the other side of the bracket. My goodness, Florida had it on a platter, Blake. Just had it right there. We talked at halftime. Florida was up 5. I didn't get to see much of the first half. You just said, I don't like the way they're playing. I looked at the score and I was like, what's he talking about? But then I watched it and I saw it. And the thing that bothered me down the stretch, and I don't know if this is on Mike White, probably so, or if it's on Trey Mann, but I just didn't think he demanded the ball and really took over. He and Castleton were really the two guys that I didn't think that Oral Roberts had much of an answer for. And I just watched him with possessions down the stretch with 2 and 3 minutes left where Mann barely touches the ball. And I'm like, what are you guys doing here?
Well, there was a lot of debate on that, to say the least. Just in terms of how that game played out, I think there were a lot of Florida fans frustrated and felt like, they took their foot off the gas offensively to where they just sort of just slowed down a bit. And I think that was the first thing Mike White was asked in his post-game press conference was if he had any regret about slowing the game down in the final, 10 minutes of the game. And I think when you look at it overall, I don't know. Like, I feel like it was sort of a situation where they tried to pick up things defensively at the cost of slowing things down offensively. And I just don't think you can do that in those kind of games. And just be in a situation where you're going to find yourself winning against a team that has all the confidence in the world, like Oral Roberts. They're playing with house money. They have nothing to lose at this point. And boy, Florida turned the ball over a ton. I mean, you turned the ball over 20 times against a team. When you look at it, like Oral Roberts, if that's what you're talking about earlier, why Oral Roberts maybe finished with the record they did, they're just not a great defensive team at all. And I think for Florida to turn the ball over 20 times against them, that's got to be disheartening because, I mean, I just don't know how you put yourself in that situation to where you've got a team that is very offensive based. And if you just can play good defense, you're going to give yourself a chance. But Florida just turned it over too much. And they did. They slowed the pace down. I'm not sure why. That's what I said. Like, if that's the one lesson I would learn if I was out, like Alabama, Arkansas, LSU, we've seen it. If you just can push the tempo, though you're so athletic, you're so good offensively in what you can do. I mean, Florida, that was kind of the thing this season where they had changed their pace a bit. Where in the past, we were used to Mike White's teams kind of slowing things down, more half-court based, and that kind of stuff. But I don't know. Like this just felt like a game where you just had to keep pushing and pushing and pushing because this just again you're playing a team that was not great defensively, has not sort of been in this spot before, and it was. I just the way that I never felt great about Florida in this game, even when they were up. I guess what was it? They were up 11 with basically 10 minutes to go in the second half. I still didn't feel great about it. Like I just and that's what one of the things I kept saying all year long, and you know this. I just never felt like Florida was a team that was going to be able to put teams away. And this was that example. Like this was the perfect example of that. Look how many close games they played this season. I did the math before the game started, and I put this out on Twitter just to say this. Like 10 of Florida's 15 wins this season were by 9 points or less. And some of those were against bad teams because they just could never find a way to put teams away because they just offensively, I felt like could never get to that next level to completely blow teams out aside from a couple different games throughout the season. And that came back to sort of haunt them here in that they just could not put teams away and be efficient enough offensively to do that. And then, had some lapses defensively too that certainly didn't help.
Well, I have several thoughts on Florida here, okay? First of all, you heard the players this year talking about how much they love to play fast, and they loved what they were doing early in the season, how much fun it was. And I watched them at times where they would just spring those traps on other teams and force turnovers, get in the open floor, and get easy baskets. It helps when you've got a big like Castleton who can really run the floor and finish with dunks and layups on the other end. And I just saw that identity. I think that's why you and I differed on this team for much of the year, Blake. I think the two teams where we were the furthest apart on were them and LSU. And when I saw Florida play, I think I saw a lot of the good games where Florida was doing the things that I felt suited their personnel. And Scotty Lewis was a big part of that. And that's where this comes full circle, okay? And by the way, the two teams that took the air out of the ball that had really been doing well and just stopped doing what they were doing were them and Rutgers, and both of them ended up losing in the last minute. So lesson learned there maybe for you if you're a coach out there listening is when it's working like that, yeah, use some caution. But I just felt like Florida just went away from its game. And again, Trey Mann is part of that. But Lewis was such an important part of this team. And honest to God, I wish I knew what went on there because he barely played at times. He plays 19 minutes and gives Florida nothing. He gets 3 fouls. But I just saw a team that did a couple things exceptionally well. And when they got in their style, it really worked for them. But it just wasn't on display late in that game.
No, it was, and that's what I think frustrated Florida fans with. They just felt like they went away from what worked because they did. They sort of had their foot on the gas and then they let up offensively to try to slow the game down. And it just didn't work. I think it just gave Oral Roberts too many opportunities. And look, if you slow the game down, that's fine. But if you turn the ball over, it doesn't really do anything for you. So it was, I don't know, man. You could have asked for a better setup, right? And we said that on Friday in that I just felt like there was going to be some chaos in that part of the bracket. And you got exactly what you wanted if you're Florida. You found a way to win an overtime game against Virginia Tech, and then you get the 15th seed. Like, you could have asked for a better setup. Like, that was it. Like, it was right there waiting for you. And it just could not capitalize on what they could do. And I thought Colin Castleton, a guy that, to be honest with you, I was a little up and down on throughout the season. I really didn't know. I mean, I knew his points and stats were there, but I just didn't know, in these kind of games, what's he going to do in these? How is he going to factor into what they do? He was fantastic against Virginia Tech. Had another double-double against Oral Roberts. I know he had some turnovers, but still, like, I thought he played well for the most part. And, it's still, like, it doesn't, then you're going home. Like, you're out of the tournament. And I just thought that, I don't know. I really felt like that it was set up to give us Arkansas and Florida in the Sweet 16, it just did not happen that way.
Well, and how many times do we see this in postseason, right? Where a team, and I guess they only played once, and Arkansas won in Fayetteville, but you see teams play in conference, and just that familiarity of knowing what the other guy's going to do is sort of an equalizer. And look, I think we would have both picked Arkansas to beat Florida. I think we would have both done it without a lot of hesitation. But as this tournament has shown, everything gets turned upside down. And I would have been interested to see how Florida, because when everything is going well with the Gators, Again, they've got athleticism. They can do some things that could have caused Arkansas problems. I don't think it was out of the question that Florida got into the Elite Eight, but this is one I think is going to sting a long time in Gainesville.
I think so too, because again, you could not have asked for a better path or a better setup. I think in that scenario, just yeah, when you looked at it overall, I just thought it was sort of the best scenario we could have asked for. And look, I mean, I think the one thing I will say and try to keep in perspective here is, I mean, this Florida team had quite a season. In terms of everything that happened. Keontae Johnson, at what point you sort of decide to come back and play the rest of the year. And I know there's a lot of emotion surrounding, well, none of that, whatever. It's been March now, and that happened in December. Come on, though. Like, that's still, I think, something that certainly affects you. And they were a completely different team this season than we thought they were going to be, because we expected Keontae Johnson to be the guy that sort of made everything go. And I think, you can play what ifs and stuff, and I get it, but a Florida team with Trey Mann and Keontae Johnson leading the way and having Colin Castleton play the way that he did, I mean, man, that's a really good team. And I'm probably not having the questions I had about them throughout the season, but I do think that was the one thing it just changed. It changed so much because everything this season was going to run through him. And even though Trey Mann kind of had to be that guy that could put up 25 at any time, having another guy that could do that wouldn't have hurt either. So, yeah, just certainly a unique season for Florida, to say the least. And obviously, ends in disappointment just based on how that game played out.
Well, and that's a good point. We are being critical of Mike White today for some things that we didn't get, but give the guy credit. You lose your stud player, you have these COVID quarantines and things where, well, I guess with theirs, it was just, I don't remember what their absence was now, if it was just because he was done or if they had positive tests or whatever. But you had a team that really didn't get the chance to pick up the pieces and play some give me out of conference games before it went into the conference schedule. You build around an SEC player of the year, right? I mean, when you lose a guy like that, it changes how you approach the game. I give him credit because he had recruited well enough to where the Gators ended up earning a 7 seed basically without the preseason player of the year. You mentioned Castleton. That was a guy that we weren't even talking about in the preseason. They developed him into a second team all SEC level player. Again, I thought that they used the guards like at times Lewis and Appleby and guys like that to where, and Anthony DeRuggi on some nights really was kind of an energy guy. I thought that Mike White, for all our criticisms we have of him today, did a fairly good job of reshaping that team in January and doing enough then to get them in position to where they were in the tournament in March. And I think that's not fair if we go through the podcast and don't mention that.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. I think just the circumstances of the Keontae Johnson. I mean, when ESPN's not, they haven't showed the replays of him, going down and stuff like that. But like when they just show the replays of, Mike White running over, and basically you can just see the look in his eye, and you're seeing the kids just the way. I mean, what a again, I can still see that, and I wasn't there, and it's just when they show the replay of the aftermath of that, I'm just like, my goodness, like that for me always keeps it in perspective in terms of just the overall thing. And I get it. Like, sports fans, it's an interesting dynamic. I understand. But this has been such a different season. And I think, the whole situation with Keontae Johnson, I still try to put that in perspective just based on, the criticism we can have about an individual game or just the way the team is played. But that to me is always something that I still think about. And like you said, I mean, this was just if Florida loses to Ohio State, like it's a much different situation, I think. It's just we're not having the conversation to the extent that we are, but I think it's that frustration for Florida fans knowing that the setup was as perfect as it could get. Playing a number 15 seed where you've only seen one 15 seed advance beyond, the first round before, or the second round before, with Florida Gulf Coast. And now, you have that same setup here where you're up 11 late in the second half, and you just can't put it away. I think it's just the way it played out that makes it sting quite a bit more, I think, if you're a Florida fan.
All right. We've gone almost 40 minutes and haven't talked about Tennessee. Vol fans may be grateful for that by this point.
I was going to say, that's probably a good thing because I don't know what you say about what they did against Oregon State.
I don't either. I don't get that game at all. I mean, it's the NCAA tournament. We talked about how Tennessee's been inconsistent, but I was really astonished at how poorly they played. Now, granted, if we know Fulkerson's not going to play, then that makes some difference. But I mean, they had really leaned on him for the most part this year. I just felt like they had enough talent at guard. You have Victor Bailey stepping up and having big games for them at times. You still got Pons underneath, although that matchup was maybe a little bit more difficult against this particular team. But I just not expect Tennessee to be uncompetitive in this game from the tip.
No, they were not, and yeah, it was just. I mean, it's what we said. Like I feel like it's sort of the theme. If you get the Tennessee team that is not playing well offensively, like they can have games like that, and it was just never close, never led one time as the number 5 seed against the number 12. And look, I think you have to separate. You could say, well, I mean, look at Oregon State now, like they're in the Sweet 16. That's fine, but if you have to look at this game individually too, and say they wouldn't get there if Tennessee plays offense and just wasn't so bad offensively to the point to where, I mean, I don't know. Like they go 5 of 26 from 3. I think that's the one thing. We never thought this was going to be a great shooting team. Obviously, they had to shoot more from 3 than they wanted to because they were trying to come back. But my goodness, to trail by 20 in this game, I don't know. Like and the John Fulkerson thing, like I said, it could be a difference. And we saw that somewhat here because you had Roman Silva, the 7-1 kid. He had 16 points. He led the way for Oregon State in that game, and I think John Fulkerson probably affects some things defensively if he plays in that game. But overall, I mean, it's the same old story, right? Keon Johnson, Jaden Springer, one other guy steps up, and then it's just beyond that. There's not like you just don't have much production offensively, and so it had a very frustrating game. And look, I mean, if you're Tennessee, you're not going to win a game, whether it's a tournament. I don't care who you're playing. If E. Pons has 4 points and 2 rebounds and 3 turnovers in 27 minutes, like that's just not enough. And I think that was one of the things too, where Pons and Fulkerson, guys like that, it was sort of the theme we mentioned all season, where offensively you had to get more out of them. And I just thought it just again, timing wise was not great here to be able to have the game that they had. And this was one where I said, some of those games were like if Arkansas and Alabama are down double digits late, I still feel like they had a chance. As soon as this game got going, I never felt like Tennessee had a chance to win this game because you could just tell right away that they were not going to be able to get enough offensively to make this a game.
I feel like often when a team underperforms and a coach gets criticized, I think some of that's misplaced because some nights your shots just are falling and it makes up for a lot of stuff. And some nights the shots aren't falling, and it happens even on great shooting teams. And sometimes it's as simple as that. And maybe there was an element in here because Victor Bailey Jr. 1 of 9 from 3. If he has a normal game, he's hitting 3 or 4 of those, and it's a little closer, and maybe the conversation is a little different at the end, although the margin here was so big, that might be a stretch. But I just felt like, again, you're like, where's Tennessee's identity? And I felt like when Tennessee's down 15 or so in the second half, Keon Johnson was a guy that took the bull by the horns and was trying to take the ball in transition off the glass and get layups on the other side. And I don't know. I just don't know if he's good enough to carry them right now. Maybe he is. He's a very talented player. But I wanted to see more from Jaden Springer because, as we've said all year, I feel like he's the guy on that team, the one guy who is most capable of putting the team on his back and carrying them. I mean, you could say that about Bailey too, but again, the shots weren't falling. But I felt like Springer was the guy, if there was a comeback to be had, that had to lead it, and that just didn't happen.
No, and I mean, you can't dig yourself a 20-point hole in a tournament game either, and just be, I don't know, like, man, I mean, what was it? I think it was 20-point game with 6 minutes left in the second half, and it's just like I was just at that point, I'm thinking, how did it get to this point to where this Tennessee team's down 20 to Oregon State, who's picked whatever, they picked 12th in the Pac-12, and then they made their run, and then Tennessee wasn't that kind of the full circle where Tennessee was picked to win the SEC. And they're down 20 to the team that was picked last, and they're picked 12. I think they were picked last, weren't they? Oregon State in the Pac-12.
They were, because their whole thing was they used that 12 slogan. They were picked 12th, and I think there was some other thing. I was waiting for Tennessee to get a garbage bucket at the end to make it a 12-point margin, but it didn't happen.
I was gonna say it kind of came full circle in terms of just crazy like that. That just shows you the just what a weird season, man. Just to think that the team that I was completely all in on, the pick to win the SEC, can't even find a way to come close to scoring a bucket against the team that was picked last in the Pac-12. And there's your other storyline. Bill Walton somewhere got to be excited because the Pac-12, we said it before the tournament started. We said we had a lot of these Pac-12 teams going far in our bracket, and we didn't know why because we weren't necessarily high on them. But, I didn't have Oregon State in the Sweet 16, but I guess you can kind of understand now that Pac-12's having quite a run here.
All right, most disappointing team in the SEC this year. I think this is an easy answer, but I'm just going to throw it to you. Either Tennessee or Kentucky. Who's your pick?
I think it's probably Kentucky, just based on the record. Yeah, I think they were more disappointed just based on the record, and they were just so far away. Tennessee at least got to the tournament as a top 5 seed, so I guess, maybe not overall disappointing to that level, but still disappointing, I think, if you had the high expectations that probably I had for Tennessee.
Yeah, tournament results tend to cloud our picture, but Tennessee did beat Missouri, Arkansas, Kansas, Kentucky on the road for whatever that's worth. Beat Florida a couple times. It's not like the Vols didn't have some good moments and bank some good wins.
And yeah, and that's the thing is overall, they felt like they were just one thing away, and that was just a little more consistent offense. Kentucky felt like they were 15 things away from being able to have, a much more consistent season. So, yeah, you still have to be disappointed, I think, if you're Tennessee fans overall, just based on how the season finished for sure.
Any wrap-up thoughts on basketball? I thought we'd maybe touch baseball for just a minute. We'll spend some time on the Tuesday pod on that. But first weekend of SEC play, and it being a Monday show, I thought that needed a little bit of a discussion here. But anything on hoops before we move to baseball?
No, I think it's just, it'd be interesting to see who joins Arkansas in the Sweet 16, if anyone joins Arkansas in the Sweet 16 from the SEC. The good LSU shows up. I think they can beat Michigan. I think if Alabama can set the tempo early against Maryland, I think they'll beat Maryland. So, yeah, I'm very curious to see how those two games play out.
Well, like I said at the start of the show, I got to watch Jack Leiter's no-hitter in person. He walks the leadoff guy of the game and then gets 27 in a row. Just an unbelievable performance. The kids' secondary pitches were not, I'm not going to say they weren't working because they're hard to hit, but he wasn't landing them for strikes. So he just goes fastball, and he's 95, 96, 97 almost the whole game. I saw Kumar Rocker's no-hitter against Duke 2 years ago in the NCAA tournament. Those, I think, are the two most incredible sporting performances I've ever witnessed in person at any level, and that was just an unforgettable game to be at.
Yeah, I'm sure. I saw all the videos and stuff that you had uploaded, and like I told you before, it's kind of one of those things where obviously I'm watching a lot of basketball, but I've got this in the corner of my eye, and I'm like, all right, well, and then of course, you know how it goes with no hitters. Like you start to sort of get that sense, and you're trying not to do anything that's going to maybe throw anything off the mojo or anything. And yeah, it was crazy as you're just kind of watching it for me out of the corner of my eye. I'm just like, all right, well, there's another one, and then there's another one, and it's just like it kept going and going. Like you said, just to start the game, it was just that's one of the crazy things I guess about sports is to start the game with a walk, and then from there, just basically turn it on to the point to where no one can do anything. Just unbelievable, and that's what we said going into the season. I mean, the pitching for Vanderbilt, we said it so many times. I mean, it's so good to the point to where it can completely carry them. They don't have to score 15 runs a game like maybe some teams would have to do to be in the spot they're in. My goodness, when you have two guys like that, it puts you on another level. And yeah, that was something. And I'm sure the atmosphere there was pretty fantastic just to kind of see that there in person. So,
well, the atmosphere wasn't fantastic because they only had maybe 400 or 500 people in the building. Vanderbilt's not allowing many people in. It's not allowing people in the press box, which is why I was in the stands, which I actually ended up being grateful for because I had a better view. But yeah, I mean, it felt anticlimactic, just like the NCAA tournament. Here you go, you got this kid that's pitching the game of his life, and should be 3,000 people in the stands and everybody juiced. But again, that's the world we're living in right now, where just everything's a little bit off. But that was one of those no hitters. It was hard to complete because he had 16 strikeouts, and anytime you have that, you've got a high pitch count. He's sitting at 90 pitches after the sixth, and I'm going, Carolina can't hit him, but there's almost no way he's going to go the distance, but he does. And the last pitch of the game, Blake, he gets a strikeout on a 97-mile-an-hour fastball. I mean, the whole thing was just incredible, but just all the elements of it where you've got this guy where he's not getting these other great pitches to work. He's got a high pitch count, just had so many things working against him. Oh, by the way, in a lineup he's playing against with a lot of guys that can hit fastballs, that's just how special that kid was. He had all these things working against him, and yet he does it anyway.
Well, that's what I was thinking is, he does it against South Carolina, which is the team we kept talking about. I mean, we've talked about it, all season in terms of just the way they started the year and in terms of all the home runs and the runs they're putting up. And just to kind of think of that, I was like, man, that's quite a team to do it against. Although I know they've struggled a little bit as of late in terms of putting up the number of runs that they put up early in the season, which we go back to those games against Dayton and Winthrop and Clemson, some of those games like that. But I just was thinking, I was like, man, you don't just do that, you do it against a team like that, as we said, certainly has some bats at times that can take advantage of some of the things you can do pitching wise. So.
Well, you've got two unbeaten teams coming out of the weekend, although I feel a little differently about both. One's Auburn, one is Ole Miss, the other one is Florida. The Gators, I'm not going to say we buried them because, of course, we didn't. But to see Florida put up 24 runs against an A&M staff that just been dominant, sometimes teams take a while to gel, and I really wonder if that's what we're not getting out of the Gators after this week. And, oh, by the way, the pitching was pretty good too. A&M not a juggernaut of an offensive club, but holding them to 9 runs is impressive. I just thought the Gators sort of changed the narrative maybe coming out of the weekend.
Well, and you always feel like a team like that there's a reason why they're picked at the top to start the year, because, to me, it's like, okay, if I'm looking at this going into the year, I think this team is not only maybe the best at this point to start the season, but I look ahead and I'm like, all right, maybe this is the team that has the most potential to get to that point and stay at that point. And that's why, like I said, there's a reason why Florida, I think, was picked as high as they were. And you sort of just feel like it's going to correct itself at some point. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen all the time where, teams just have bad seasons, but I feel like maybe you're starting to see that a little bit here with some of the things they can do. And like you said, it was against A&M. I'm probably feeling a little bit differently if they do it against, someone like Ole Miss or Vanderbilt or teams like that. But still, I think you're probably starting to sense some of the things that maybe Florida can do to get back to not necessarily the very top team in the country right now, but can they get there eventually? Maybe you're starting to see some of those things that you're like, all right, maybe that's why Florida was still the team that everyone picked in the preseason. So
Auburn goes and loses 3 in Oxford, 1-0, 6-5 the first 2, and then just a crazy one on Sunday where Ole Miss wins a game where bullpens couldn't get out by a 19-11 score. I don't know how to feel about the Rebels right now. They lost a couple of midweek games. I think the pitching talent is there, but I'm starting to be a little bit more concerned about Ole Miss.
That was a misleading score line, wasn't it? The game that they played on Sunday, because what was it? I think Ole Miss was up 14-0 going into the 8th, and Auburn scored 9 on top of the 8th, and it was just what a wild game that was. Because I looked up. And I was like, wait a second, because some of the people it was on, I'm following stuff on Twitter, and I've got 3 different things going and different screens and all this. And I was like, okay, it's 14-0. I turned the game. That was one that I kind of just turned off for a second. I'm like, okay, well, this is obviously not anything I need to be paying attention to. And then all of a sudden I look up, and it's a situation where, it's like 14-9. So, just a wild game that was.
Yeah, I say I'm a little more concerned about Ole Miss. That's probably unfair. I just had the bar of expectation set so high for the team because of all the arms it brought back and all the bats. And again, you see this sometimes in March. Teams just aren't what they're going to be in May. But I would have liked to seen. What am I saying here? They swept an SEC team. I'm probably being a little bit hard, but I guess that 19-11 game. Sometimes your last impression is the one that's the loudest, and that's not something I expected. Although Auburn has shown it can really crush the ball.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I don't know. Like in any sport, I feel like there are certain games like that where you're up 14-0 in a baseball game. And I wonder sometimes, I'm like, man, it's just at some point we talk about like having to correct things kind of correct themselves with Florida and stuff. That's more of sort of a bigger conversation. But like in a single game, like at some point it's like, all right, this game probably shouldn't have been 14-0. I feel like that we got to have some sort of gap narrowed somewhere, and maybe just one of those kind of strange finishes that in normal circumstances maybe you don't see necessarily in a game like that. So
I think what it is, Ole Miss has given up 15 home runs, which I would not have expected. Its starting pitching has not been maybe quite what we hoped. I still think that's a really good ball team and lots of bullpen arms. But I think that's where I would have liked to seen a little bit more from Ole Miss is there.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like you said, I mean, it was a weird game, especially just the way that series ended with that particular game. But like you said, you can take some things away from it and say, well, it would have been nice if you want to kind of look at this team as, a top 5 team and say, well, maybe you find a way to finish that game a little bit stronger than giving up, 11 runs in the final 2 innings. So.
All right, Blake, I think we're done for the day. Tell folks what's up ahead at the 14. Anything else like that, give your Twitter handle account, give ours out too. I hope people follow us and subscribe to the podcast. But anyway, we will wrap up today. We'll have a more baseball-centric episode tomorrow. And, of course, we'll talk about the 2 Monday games involving the SEC in the NCAA Tournament. But let's close this out here.
Yep, southeastern14.com. You can find everything there, coverage of obviously baseball, tournament. We'll have a lot of stuff. Continue to go up there, and be sure to follow the Twitter account at 14 Southeastern. And, lots of great stuff on the way.
All right, he's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. Thank you for listening to the Monday episode of the 14. We'll see you again on Tuesday.